For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lo-Fi Apocrypha, where we talk about things that aren't that deep until they actually are. I am your host, Mom Chalan, and today I wanted to talk about this one book that's actually quite historic, but it feels more like an entry in the Warhammer series. Now, the term Grimdark is something that was coined and popularized by Warhammer 40K. Google defines it as a subgenre of speculative fiction characterized by bleak settings, amoral characters, and pervasive violence. Originating from the tabletop game, the genre features a cynical, unforgiving world where heroes, quote-unquote, are morally gray and happy endings are exceptionally rare, which, sounds a whole lot less like a space opera and more uncomfortably like your average Tuesday in 2026. I personally define Grimdark as you recognizing your situation as a catch-22 where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, and the best option available is usually choosing the lesser of two evils, which immediately creates another problem because who decides what the lesser evil actually is? Most Grimdark stories don't provide a satisfying answer. They simply hand the characters a broken situation and tell them, hey, make the least catastrophic decision possible. With that in mind, I'd like to submit a somewhat unusual candidate for one of the most grimdark texts ever written, Ecclesiastes. Now, before the theologians begin loading their trebuchets and lighting up the stake for my public burning, hear me out, because Ecclesiastes is not a story about triumph, nor is it a gospel of hope. It's not a story about conquering evil. It isn't even interested in solving the human condition. Instead, it asks a series of deeply uncomfortable questions, forcing you to look in and dig really deep. What if your accomplishments are forgotten? What if wisdom doesn't prevent suffering? What if good people suffer while the wicked prosper? What if death eventually equalizes everyone anyway? Which, spoiler alert, is a thing both in Warhammer 40K and in our present 2K. And perhaps most unsettling of all, what if you spend your entire life chasing meaning only to discover that meaning cannot be manufactured the way wealth, power, or knowledge can? Brethren, this is not the opening premise of an uplifting self-help book. That is the aria being sung as the curtains rise to your opera of self-inflicted existential anxiety. Chapter 1. The subject of Ecclesiastes. Most grimdark protagonists discover the universe is indifferent to their sufferings. Games Workshop released a brand new cinematic snippet on the Emperor twitching on the Golden Throne about 2-ish weeks or so ago, and they reiterate that sentiment. There is no cosmic power that cares for your well-being. You don't matter, nothing you do matters, and you will not be remembered. The author of Ecclesiastes discovered this very sobering sentiment around 3,000 years ago and responded by recommending you go take a nap to wake up with a better attitude. No, really. And the more I think about it, the more I think the thesis isn't quote-unquote Ecclesiastes is grimdark. The thesis is Ecclesiastes starts with grimdark observations and somehow pushes us till we arrive at gratitude. That's the weird thing, because a lot of grimdark stories stop at everything is terrible, which it is, while Ecclesiastes goes, everything is temporary. Therefore, enjoy the sunshine, eat your bread, appreciate your friends, and stop pretending you're in control of the universe. Because history and fiction consistently document how things go badly for those who grip too tight on what they think should and should not be. Then again, perhaps the best example of this philosophy isn't found in the realm of theology at all. It's found in one of the most aggressively Warhammer stories imaginable, centering around a victim of circumstance that refused to be defeated. Her name is Ephrael Stern. Now, for those unfamiliar with the setting, Ephrael's life reads less like a biography and more like an official HR complaint filed against reality itself. She was part of the Adepta Sororitas, a battle sister who was killed horribly in combat. She was resurrected through demonic powers that she never asked for. She was declared a heretic by the Imperium that she bled and died for. She was rejected by the very institution she continued trying to serve, even as a resurrected wraith. She was forced into alliances with people she should have every reason to not trust, all while still doing her best to save her former battle sisters who, by the way, they still don't want anything to do with her. Now Ephrael was captured, she was imprisoned, she was tortured. And through it all, she doesn't give up hope. She continues praying to the Emperor for salvation. She continues waiting and asking for answers. And this woman receives what may be the most Ecclesiastes response imaginable. Silence. No grand explanation, no divine flowchart. There's no cosmic FAQ section. No neat little answer that suddenly makes the suffering worthwhile. There's no breakthrough or grand revelation or realization that tells her that everything's going to be okay. Instead, she reaches a realization that feels strangely familiar to anyone who has spent time reading Ecclesiastes. And that is that the absence of answers does not remove the need for action. People still need protection. Duty still exists. The work remains, and so she, Ephrael Stern, must choose to persist. Oh, not because she finally understands everything, far from it, or because the universe suddenly became fair. This isn't a Disney movie where suddenly when you have a grand realization, everything around you breaks into song. Not because she receives certainty, but because uncertainty does not absolve us of responsibility. The TLDR of this is Sister Ephrael Stern realized in the middle of her imprisonment that there would be no answer, no rescue, no solution, and no help. So she decided right at that very moment of despair that she chooses to be the answer. She is her own salvation because she knows that her fellow sisters of battle needed her. And that is just, aside from the fact that it's completely epic, that is the most Grimdark and Ecclesiastes thing ever. Ecclesiastes and the Grimdark acknowledge the skullduggery of the situation, that you've been mollywopped by the universe, and they choose to keep going. Chapter 2. A brief history of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes belongs to what biblical scholars typically call wisdom literature, alongside books such as Proverbs and Job. Traditionally attributed to King Solomon, the text presents itself as the reflections of a successful ruler who possessed wealth, influence, knowledge, and every opportunity for earthly satisfaction. Whether one accepts Solomonic authorship or views the text as a later wisdom work, the central premise remains the same. The speakers climb every ladder society tells us is worth climbing and return back to Earth with a rather uncomfortable report. The report essentially reads thus: many of the things we spend our lives chasing cannot and will not provide lasting meaning on their own. For a book written thousands of years ago, Ecclesiastes feels remarkably modern. It wrestles with burnout, mortality, uncertainty, injustice, disappointment, and the uncomfortable realization that achievement does not automatically produce fulfillment. In other words, the author arrived at several 21st century existential crash-outs approximately 3 millennia ahead of schedule. Chapter 3. Why does Ecclesiastes feel so grimdark? So one of the reasons this book continues to resonate with readers of different beliefs is that its observations are deeply and painfully human. You don't need to be religious to recognize that people are often forgotten. You don't need to be religious to notice that good people suffer while evil prevails spectacularly. You don't need to go to church to understand that intelligence, wealth, or hard work cannot completely shield a person from tragedy and heartbreak. These observations, these journal entries, if you will, of a depressed king, they're not theological claims. They are observations about the human condition. And this is why the book feels surprisingly similar to grimdark fiction. It almost feels like the backbone of it. Both refuse to pretend that reality is fair. Both acknowledge that people are often forced to navigate difficult situations with incomplete information. Both recognize that life contains suffering that cannot simply be wasted away. Both recognize that life contains suffering that cannot simply be wished away. It understands that manifestation is a nice thought, but often remains just that, a thought. The difference is that grimdark stories often stop there. You've been emotionally battered for the last 97 chapters without respite, only to find that that's it. That's the story. That's the tweet. That's all she wrote. Ecclesiastes, however, does not handle the memento mori in the same fashion. Chapter 4. Strength Beyond Sunshine and Daisies. Modern encouragement often arrives in a very specific format, the type that proudly screams Tumblr 2010. It's almost like those bumper stickers that you see when you're stuck in traffic. Believe in yourself. Everything happens for a reason. Stay positive. Good vibes only. While these statements may sometimes be helpful, they can become frustrating when used to dismiss genuine hardship. Someone experiencing grief, uncertainty, fear, or disappointment doesn't need a motivational poster. Sometimes they need honesty. Ecclesiastes offers that distinct kind of encouragement. It does not lift people up by denying suffering. It encourages people by acknowledging suffering and demonstrating that life remains worth living anyway, no matter how difficult and fleeting it may be. That distinction matters. There's a profound difference between saying, everything is fine, and saying, everything is absolutely not fine, but I still have a purpose. The second statement may be less comforting at first glance, but it is often far more resilient. And in a universe where everything is destined to go wrong, resilience might be the one thing that will help keep us all afloat. Chapter 5. The difference between hope and toxic positivity. Now this is where Ecclesiastes feels surprisingly irrelevant. The book is frequently mistaken for hypochondria and pessimism because it refuses to sugarcoat reality. In truth, it may be functioning as an antidote to something far more dangerous than that: toxic positivity. This insists that every situation must be reframed as good, uplifting, or inspirational. You're forced to turn every bad situation into a good one, whether or not you're too tired or you're grieving. It's giving girl boss making a motivational speech about how you can make it big if you quote-unquote hustle hard enough. Ecclesiastes refuses to participate in that game. When something's tragic, it calls it exactly that, tragic. When something is unfair, it calls it unfair. When life feels confusing, it acknowledges the confusion. The weird thing is that paradoxically, this honesty creates room for genuine, real, functional hope. After all, hope is not the belief that nothing bad exists. Hope is the decision to keep moving forward despite knowing that bad things exist. Ecclesiastes doesn't argue that life is meaningless. It argues that many of the things we mistakenly treat as ultimate sources of purpose, they're not load-bearing and they cannot carry that weight. And once those poisoned illusions of fake positivity are stripped away, the book repeatedly returns to surprisingly simple recommendations. Enjoy your meal, appreciate your work, value your relationships, and cherish the time you have. And perhaps the most unexpected twist imaginable, one of the most grimdark books in both scripture and human writing ultimately arrives at a deeply practical appreciation for ordinary life. The universe remains complicated. The questions will remain unanswered. The choices stay difficult, and the mystery remains. Yet somehow, the conclusion of King Solomon's journal is not despair, but rather on how indomitable the human spirit can be against all odds. And if that doesn't make Ecclesiastes a forerunner of Warhammer books, I don't know what else is. Thank you for tuning into Lo-Fi Apocrypha. This has been your host, Mom Chalan, and I'll talk to you all again soon. Bye!